Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted once again to have special guest David Lowe on the show. Welcome back, David. How are you keeping?
I'm keeping very good. Great to be here again. It's getting to be a regular thing now. So let's see how we get on this time.
Yeah, you're going for your testimonial. I think you've been on 8 times, but that's brilliant. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And when we spoke at the beginning of the season, we were moving into the unknown. And what you did back then is you gave us an idea, David, of the financial impact of COVID on Celtic Football Club and the wider football landscape. We are now at a stage where there's a massive rebuild, there's a major rebuild. We're going to talk all about that. We're going to talk about Celtic Shared, the Celtic Trust, and some of the failings that have happened at the club since we last spoke. So, in a nutshell, David, where did it all go wrong and where do we go from here as a football club?
Well, you've referenced, the start of the season, COVID. I personally, I've always had the view, that it was very unlikely that we'd ever be Celtic Park at any point this season, and that's what's transpired. And frankly, it's had a disastrous effect on football clubs across Europe. So it's been disastrous for Celtic. It's a dramatic word, so we'll just stick with it. But it's dramatic disastrous for everybody else, not having all that discretionary spend, then having to sell season tickets for a season where you still don't have any clarity as to what's going to happen going forward with the virus, and you're asking for money off supporters who received next to nothing for the 25 million in Celtic's instance that was shelled out this time last season. So it's not a very good economic backdrop for any football club at this moment in time. I think it's even worse when you've had a disappointing season, because supporters like Celtic are disillusioned. And the financial situation comes into play as well. So it's not a very healthy backdrop for Celtic, which is the club we're interested in, obviously.
No, absolutely. Now, a lot of Celtic fans, and the other night, in fact, David, the Aberdeen game, yes, it's a dead rubber, as much of a dead rubber as a Celtic game can be. A lot of Celtic fans are looking at that and thinking, well, we've shelled out for the virtual season ticket, subscriptions to various channels, and then various one-off games. And Axom, we refused to buy it, and we ended up covering the women's game instead. That was our small protest against the amount of money that we've had to shell out. But we've been promised extra value as Celtic fans. David, have we had that this season?
Well, clearly we haven't. So we've had a disappointing football season. Sometimes these things happen, so we'll put that to one side. But this time last year, or in March last year, the club Celtic, appealed to our heartstrings with all the platitudes about how magnificent we are and how faithful we are, and come join us, chase the 10. It's all there in writing, and we went for it big time. And we put in 25 million into the unknown because we didn't know what we were getting, because the virus was just kicking off. But I don't think too many thought it was going to last the season. I think an awful lot of Celtic fans thought, well, I'm definitely buying my season ticket because I want that seat when we get the 10, because this virus should be over by then. That was a big selling point, the 10, having your seat for the 10. And on that basis, all the season tickets were sold and sold out. And on the 23rd of June, Celtic put a press release out saying, thank you for your support. You're brilliant, this, brilliant, that. Let's go for it. Let's go for it together. And we all started off on our merry journey full of the enthusiasm of the day. And of course, it was sort of downhill from then on. But that's what happened a year ago. And here we are, a year later, and it's been disastrous in terms of everything we've talked about there, Paul John. So there you go.
When we're looking at the disastrous nature of it, as football fans, and we've done it on Axom, David, you look at the team, you look at the manager, and a lot of the time the criticism lies there. But we've gone deeper than that this season, because we have looked at the highest echelons of Celtic Park, and we're looking at Dermot Desmond, and we're asking the question, what are you going to do to put this right? We've looked at Peter Lawwell and said, how much of the blame lies on your shoulders? And of course, we've also got Ian Bankier, a chairman who doesn't really communicate with the fan base. When you're looking to where it went wrong and who to apportion blame to, I mean, how big is that blame on those figures that I've mentioned? Before we speak about Neil Lennon and the players and everything that went wrong there, Dermot Desmond, Peter Lawwell, Ian Bankier.
Well, blame is not a word I use or a word I like. Responsibility is a word I prefer. Who's responsible for this? Why has this happened, and how has it happened? And you can look at it from two different viewpoints. You can look at it in a narrow sense from the football point. But I think the correct way to look at it is from the PLC point. Who is responsible for this? Who's in charge? The board are in charge of the situation, and they have ultimate responsibility for everything that's gone wrong. That is where the buck stops. It's the board that appoints the manager. It's the board that has been increasingly interfering with the football department, dare I say. And this is where the buck stops, because they're responsible for this. And there has to be some changes. Now, you then start to dissect the board. I mean, the board has a chairman, a guy called Ian Bankier. It has another 4 non-executive directors who are supposed to challenge the executive directors on the way that the business has been run, and challenge the executive directors as challenging the CEO and challenging the finance director. But ultimately, it's the chairman that's legally responsible for overseeing this. And all of this is referred to and narrated in the report and accounts every year. It says Ian Bankier makes a statement saying, "I am the leader of the board." Then there's a whole lot of verbiage that follows. That is the actual situation. So that is where responsibility lies when things go well and when things go badly. You got to take the rough with the smooth. But then when you sort of drill down deeper, you look at the board and the ownership profile. At the end of the day, although Dermot Desmond is a non-executive shareholder, he's also the cornerstone shareholder owner. He's a de facto controlling shareholder because a whole lot of lost votes. And basically, he calls the shots. I mean, we can sugarcoat this and sugarcoat that, but it's the Dermot show. He's also sort of non-resident, so he's sort of absent a lot of the time. So that's fair enough. Nothing wrong with any of that. If you look at it from the position that Dermot Desmond has, that's fine, but it's how you wield your influence, how you affect the direction of the company that really matters. And I think there's a failing there. Now, I or Celtic Trust are not criticising Dermot Desmond's support for Celtic. That's there to be seen. He is a Celtic supporter. Nobody can take that away from him. He has stood up when it was counted in the past. He has invested in 4 of the 5 share issues that Celtic have had since Fergus McCann took over. He's invested over £35 million or around £35 million in these share offers. The last one being 2005. Having said that, he's also received over £6 million worth of dividends. That's fair enough as well, because he's not the only one that's received those dividends. He's received them more because he's bought more shares. So all of that's fine and beyond criticism, but it's what you do with that status that matters. And I think we have a very weak board. I think we have a very weak chairman. And I think we have a very stale board of non-executive directors. And I think some changes are necessary. I think that board needs freshened up. It certainly needs a new chairman. Corporate governance, Celtic continually crow about how superb their corporate governance is. That's not true. Celtic's corporate governance is poor. They have as an AIM-listed company on the stock exchange, they have a code of conduct to abide by. They have chosen to abide by that of the Quoted Company Alliance, and their guidelines say that it is not good to have non-executive directors in situ for more than 9 years, because after that period of time, they are not deemed to be independent. They're not deemed to be performing the true definition of the role and responsibility of a non-executive director. Well, we've got 4 of them. We've got 4 directors, including the chairman, that have been there for over 9 years. And because they've been there for that long, they have to get re-elected every year rather than by rotation, which is the norm. So if you look at it from an investment perspective, investors look at it, you can be a Celtic shareholder without necessarily being a Celtic fan. But if you're an investor, you're an owner, you're a part owner. The Celtic Trust is a part owner of Celtic. The Celtic Trust and other shareholders look at these things, and they look at these things and say that's not good. The corporate governance should be improved. The board should be improved. Lots of things could be done better. There's 3 committees that public limited companies have and AIM companies have. One of them is the nominations committee. This is the committee that's supposed to meet on a fairly regular basis. Well, Celtic have had no meetings of the nominations committee. This is a committee that determines what the composition of the board should be. Is what we have good enough? Could we be doing better? Well, it wasn't even deemed important enough.
We've lost David's video. Hopefully he will return.
Hello?
Sorry, you dropped out just for a moment, David. You're back now.
Paul John, are we still
there? Back now. Yeah, you're back now. You're back now.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, David? I can see it, and your audio was back, and hopefully it will return. I can see you okay. Can you hear me now? We will get David back in on the discussion. We are talking Celtic's downfall this season, who is responsible for that. And obviously, what we'll also be speaking about is how Celtic come out the other end of this particular season with everything else that has been involved in that, including the COVID, and how that's going to harm the financial rebuilding of the Celtic football team and also the club as well, because obviously it goes to the very top of the tree. And David Lowe has appeared on A Celtic State of Mind on a number of occasions to discuss the financial element of the club, because for everybody who is tuning in, you'll be aware that David Lowe was a financial advisor for Fergus McCann when Fergus took over the club, saved the club back in the early 90s. And it's always a pleasure to get David in. So we will be linking back into him. I'm going to stay live and I'll be chatting to you and reading your comments until David comes back in. So thanks everybody for getting involved. And you are tuning in on Twitter, Facebook, and also on YouTube. So that if you do have any questions, come in, ask David Lowe, and hopefully he can answer them. Obviously, there's big questions to be asked around the running of the club. And what David was talking about there was that there's a boardroom that needs to be freshened up. And one of the biggest kind of queries, one of the biggest debates that we've had over the piece this season is the fact that the club has not engaged sufficiently with the supporters. And often you feel that they really don't know what the true feeling of the fans is. And one of the suggestions that's been made in the past is that there should be fan representation on the board. So if you are tuning in and you're listening in via Twitter, Facebook or YouTube, what are your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on fan representation on the Celtic board? Would it work? Would that re-engage the fan base with the Celtic Football Club? Sometimes you feel as though there are faceless entities at Celtic. And obviously, you know, Dermot Desmond has been criticised for that as well. But as David Lowe was saying earlier on, it's not something that he nor the Celtic Trust are trying to suggest, you know, that Dermot Desmond is not a true Celtic fan. I think his level of investment is there for all to see. And what we're trying to do at Celtic State of Mind is offer a platform for David, for Celtic Shared, because we spoke to them a few weeks ago, and also for the Celtic Trust and what they're hoping to achieve. They've been working for some time on being organised so that we can make a big difference to the way the club is run. Now, David, you are appearing again on the screen, and hopefully your connection will go live again. I can see you. Can you hear us, David?
Yeah, I can hear now, yeah.
Brilliant. You're back. You're back. It's okay. I waffled on for 5 minutes until you came back. Yes, so we're talking about the board and obviously the fact that it needs freshened up, David. It needs freshened up, the board. I would agree with that. And I think one of the biggest things that Celtic fans have been unhappy with this season is the fact that there's been a real disengagement between the fan base and the club. Do you think that fan representation on the board would bridge the gap?
Well, it could do, but not for sure, because what happens when a fan, and remember there are fans, a fan is a Celtic supporter, somebody who supports the club and everything that it is and aspires to do. And I think
Sorry, you're dropping out again there, David. Hopefully your connection will come back in, because there is plenty to discuss in relation to the situation at Celtic and where we go on a financial level. So it looks as though you've dropped out for the time being. We'll continue to chat amongst ourselves and amongst the comments that are coming in until you reconnect. Feed the Bear comes in actually to make the point. Ask him if wee Fergus would come back. I would have him back right away. Well, I think back to those days, as I'm sure a lot of you do, and with fondness in that we were able to save the club, we as Celtic fans, and the figurehead and the man who made that possible obviously was Fergus McCann. And I know that David was very close to Fergus and is still in touch with Fergus, and you wonder what someone like Fergus McCann would make of all of this. Celtic Football Club have dominated, and I'm going to go on to a point that Michelle Sharon makes. We have dominated Scottish football for a long time, and Michelle says that a board who got caught sleeping are largely to blame. No challenge and lots of trophies. Going backwards, Europe should have been the warning. And I remember the banner that was unfurled at Celtic Park by the Green Brigade warning the club, warning the ones making the decisions not to be caught out sleeping at the wheel. And it's exactly what's happened. So when we're now looking at a situation where there is a lack of players coming through the youth system, where we've got so many players who have not been value for money, fit for purpose even on some occasions, and many of those will be shipped out this pre-season, it's quite clear that two of the biggest aspects of the footballing department, being the recruitment and also the youth development, has failed. And that doesn't happen overnight, Michelle. So obviously over the period of a number of years, these elements haven't been working at Celtic, and it's all come home to roost. Now, I remember in previous podcasts Kevin Graham speaking about the fact that the issues we were facing this season was due to a long period of time where the board weren't functioning properly, and he was criticised for it, because I think people looked upon that and said, well, how could they not be fit for purpose or doing their job competently if we were able to have so much success? And I think that sometimes success can blind us, because it masks a million deficiencies or sins. And I think that has happened in the past. Now, David is trying to get back online, and he is in the waiting room. So I'm going to hopefully bring him back into the discussion in just a second, once it looks as though he is ready. And then obviously some of these questions that are coming in, I will be able to ask David them himself. David obviously is the chairman of the Celtic Trust, and he has come on and spoken to a Celtic State of Mind a number of times about the work that the Celtic Trust have been doing. I'm going to try and bring David back in now. David, I can hear you, I can see you. Can you hear and see us? Brilliant. Take three.
I can now, so I don't. Maybe it's a bad internet connection.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Okay,
That's
there you
sounding and looking great. Just while you were away there, David, someone came in, Michelle Sharon came in, Feed the Bear came in to ask about Fergus McCann. And it just makes me wonder, what would Fergus think of what's going on at Celtic at this moment in time?
Well, that I don't know. I mean, I don't think he would be too critical. At the end of the day, what's happened has only happened in one season. You know, there's a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is Fergus McCann's view, that think you can't win everything forever. We'd won a quadruple treble. Sometimes you lose leagues. It happens. It's football, and he may be of that view. I don't know, but if you're close to the action and you see games on a regular basis, you're familiar with the corporate backdrop, you can see for yourself that things have gone wrong and that a lot of cracks were getting papered over, you know, in the period since Rangers were liquidated. So for much of the last 9 years, there has been no serious, credible opposition. You know, Rangers weren't in the Premier League, or the new Rangers weren't in the Premier League for half of the time, and then for the other half, you know, they've been playing catch up and spending a whole lot of money and issuing a whole lot of shares. So I think people think, you know, we could have done a lot better than we have done, and you know, things have been going wrong since Brendan Rodgers left, and the recruitment policy's not been good. There's lots of things that have gone wrong, and I think that's the common view. But I wouldn't know exactly what Fergus thought in these matters. I do know he's got concerns about the possibility of a hostile takeover. I mean, that I know he shares my concerns in that respect. The fact that, you know, Celtic's share ownership profile is controlled by two shareholders. You know, Dermot, who I spoke about earlier, and an investment company called Lindsell Train. So, you know, Lindsell Train are professional investors. They have no emotional investment in Celtic. Their investment in Celtic is designed to make money. I mean, they're in the business of making money for their unit holders or their shareholders. So they've bought Celtic shares because they expect to make money. And if the price is right, you know, they would sell their shares, the same as they would sell any other shares. And you know, that's why they own Celtic shares. So that's a concern, you know, that control is vested in amongst two shareholders. Obviously, Dermot is not an emotional. He is an emotional investor, because Celtic shares haven't been a good investment. Let's be clear about that. Most Celtic supporters, or most of the shareholders, are Celtic supporters. Most of the shareholders haven't bought shares to make money. Most of the shareholders, including the Celtic Trust, you know, have bought shares because they want to own a part of Celtic, because they want to have a say in the running of Celtic. That's why you buy shares, for those two reasons. And a lot, or most Celtic shareholders are unconcerned about the price of the shares. As it happens, the shares have performed incredibly poorly since Fergus McCann left. They lost 60% of their value. So that, you know, it's not exactly a good investment, you know, from a stock exchange perspective, you know, the buying of Celtic shares. So it does make you wonder, you know, why Lindsell Train have bought 18% of Celtic in the last few years. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason has actually been in the news this week: jurisdictional change. I think an investor like Lindsell Train owns shares in Celtic because they are betting or gambling, for want of a better phrase, on Celtic ending up in a different jurisdiction than this sort of little backwater in Scotland. Because if that were to happen, Celtic were to get into a more financially lucrative jurisdiction like a British League or an Atlantic League or even a Super League of a fashion, the revenue profile would change dramatically, and the shares would you know, for example, only quadruple. So you saw a taste of that yesterday when there was a couple of newspaper articles.
Just at that moment, David has dropped out, unfortunately, and this was You're back. Great.
The British, the powers that be in England could be interested in having Celtic in a British league, and the shares went up.
At the mere suggestion of Celtic being involved in the British League, the share price went up. That's exactly what we want to talk about, David, because I think in the past we have spoken to David Lowe around, and he will come back in. Hopefully he'll move into another room and we'll get a connection. We spoke to David about the situation back in the late 90s. What happened then was that Celtic, who were actively looking to join the English League, had Wimbledon Football Club valued with the view to actually purchasing the club, buying Wimbledon Football Club, renaming the club, changing the registered address. And I'm going back to 1998 here. And then Celtic would have a club playing in the English League. And that was the plan back then. David came on to Axom probably about a year ago, and we spoke about those days. And David himself was looking into the Trojan horse movement, as it were, of having a Scottish team playing in an Irish league to test the water. So David, just before you dropped out there, you were talking about the share price increasing at the mere suggestion that Celtic would be part of a British league. Is that something now that you feel the club will be pursuing? There's no volume at this end, David. Unfortunately, I can't hear. I can see you perfectly well.
There you go. Is that better?
There we go. There we are.
Now then, yeah,
perfect. We're back.
So look, we're in one of those periods where change is in the air. It's happened before. You know, if you want to go way back, you know, when Thatcher and Reagan came in, they opened up the financial markets, and all of a sudden you got all these international owners interested in football clubs, and you know, television companies took stakes in football clubs, and you know that, and clubs came to the stock market. You know, that was a period of great change, and that's a generation ago. You also had, you know, the formation of the English Premiership, the Scottish Premiership in 1992 and 1998. You know, that was all about creating a bigger financial cake for fewer clubs. And, you know, that happened in Scotland in 98. There have been perennial attempts to, the holy grail for a lot of Celtic people, not all Celtic people, is we are a global brand, you know, with a global supporter base. We're a big fish in a small pond. We want to test ourselves against oppositions in other countries on a more regular basis. I'm actually into that school of thought myself, as someone that's grown up, you know, with a very successful Celtic in Europe when I was a kid. So many amongst Celtic, I think it's a view in the boardroom as well, would love Celtic to compete amongst their peers on a different stage, and leave, and dare I say it, leave a lot of the problems we have with the institutions in Scotland behind. You know, I don't think we're a loved club amongst football circles, but maybe that's another podcast for another day. So coming up to date, there is the winds of change, I think, are blowing again. That was evidenced by, you know, this Super League, which was all about greed, you know, creating a huge financial cake, cutting it into you know, 12 or 15 slices, and creating a lot more money and revenues for those that were in the league at the expense of those that weren't. So I think that's not the end of it. I think that is probably the start of it, the start of change, change in league structures, change in broadcasting, streaming, etc. Everything we're growing up with, I think, is going to get challenged because technology is enabling it to go over the top or OTT with streaming services to a global audience and a much cheaper basis, more profitable basis for clubs. So we're living in an environment of change, and I personally would hope that, you know, Celtic are part of that change, because I think your aspirations should be more than trying to just win the Scottish League year in, year out. But that's just a personal view. That's not even a view of the Celtic Trust, in case they get pulled up by committee members for for saying things on their behalf. That's my personal view.
About a year ago, David, we were
I heard something about
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I wasn't saying anything, no, for once.
What I was going to say there, about a year ago, you and I were having a chat about the fact that all bets were off. We went back to the 1990s and we spoke about how Celtic were actively looking to move the operation completely out of the Scottish leagues. There was a couple of different occasions. There was the occasion where we were looking at the English league, and obviously there was a valuation of Wimbledon Football Club. Then there was the purchase, obviously, of the Trojan horse to see if we could move a club from Scotland to Ireland. I found that fascinating. Then there was implications because rules were changed, and then in Alan McDonald's time, he was looking at the Atlantic League as well. So, all this time later, 20 odd years later, the biggest change to that, I feel, is the fallout of COVID. What I find quite interesting this week is that as football fans, we were all very critical of the proposals for the European Super League. And would it be hypocritical for Celtic to be on board a different league that took us out of Scotland? Because I know I'm like yourself. I want the best for Celtic. I want us to perform on a European level. And in order to do that, I don't think, we're hamstrung by trying to operate in the Scottish leagues for a number of reasons. But if we were to pursue that move to a British league, for example, would it be hypocritical for Celtic to do that?
It could be hypocritical for Celtic to do that, but it's all about how it's presented and in the fine detail. Is it hypocritical for Celtic, to use that example, to leave the Scottish League in toto and to join another league in England and to be the best they can be in that English league? It would only be hypocritical if it was at somebody else's expense, if somebody was prejudiced as a consequence of, Celtic doing that. I want Celtic to do well and to compete against its peer groups in Europe. I'm much more interested in, personally speaking, in Celtic doing well in Europe than what we have just now. I don't like a lot of the baggage that comes with being in Scotland. I don't like the treatment that Celtic gets. I don't like some of the support from or the things we have to put up with here. I would rather leave all that behind. But that's me personally speaking. I don't think it's hypocritical. Celtic have been flirting with this idea on and off since the 1990s. There was a talk pre-1998 of Celtic acquiring, for want of the horrible phrase, I've got to use the horrible phrase, the franchise of an English club and rebranding it. And rebranding an English football franchise is basically changing its registered ground in England to Glasgow, changing its name from whatever it is to Celtic, and changing its colours from whatever they were to Celtic's. So there was a club kicking about at the time called, well, there is still a club, there's Wimbledon, because I think it's now in the English Football League system now. But basically, they were homeless. They had been thrown out of Plough Lane. They had a sort of very small support. And the guys that owned them at the time were sort of touting it round for sale. And there was some loose talk of Celtic buying the Wimbledon franchise and doing all the things I just mentioned there. And suddenly you have Celtic, as it was, if my memory serves me correct, in what is now called the English Championship. And that was done in pre what's called a FIFA plenary in 1998. Because roughly the same time, I was involved in a similar thing with Clydebank Football Club. The owners had sold the stadium Kilbowie to a supermarket company, and for over £2 million or something. And Clydebank had at the time were Scotland's newest club. They'd sort of joined what was then the Scottish Football League, having would you believe, taken over the franchise of East Stirlingshire, and operated as ES Clydebank for a season before the decision was reversed by the football authorities. East Stirling became East Stirling again, and Clydebank were admitted to the league as Clydebank. So AFL, the SFL in the mid-60s, and by the mid-90s they had basically no ground and a tiny amount of fans, and they were sort of nomads shuffling between Greenock and Morton's ground and Dumbarton's ground. So there's some investors basically bought the club and relocated it to Dublin, which, and they had got as far as hiring the Royal Dublin Showground, I think it was called, in Ballsbridge, and intended to play out of there whilst in the Scottish League, having done the things we just mentioned earlier.
David looks to be dropping back out, unfortunately. The signal might be lost, and we hope that will be regained. Fascinating discussion around what Celtic have tried to do previously in relation to the Super League, the British League that has been proposed this week. Celtic and also Rangers have been discussed as potentially joining a British League. We've spoken about it a couple of times on Axom, and it is fascinating to get David's view on it. If we are able to reconnect with David, I want to ask him finally around Celtic Shared, which is an initiative that the Celtic Trust are involved in, along with the Green Brigade, and they will be speaking very, very soon to a wide audience online. But it would be interesting to see where they are. We spoke to the Green Brigade a few weeks ago on A Celtic State of Mind, all about Celtic Shared, and we were also going to speak to David about their plans to expand on the ideas that they've had around the Celtic Trust, how they're involved with Celtic Shared and the Green Brigade in relation to what we hope to achieve. We did speak to David about fan representation on the board. What do you think yourself about fan representation? Is that something that would alleviate some of the issues we've had this season with a lack of engagement? We'll see over the next 5 minutes if David can come back in, and if not, you can join us again at 12:30 for the bulletin. That will go ahead as normal. It will not be myself, it will be Tony Haggerty, Jim Orr, and presented by Laura Bradburn, three of the Axom team. But I will try and get David back in, because there's a few other discussion points that we could cover before the end of this particular broadcast. But that's the beauty of being able to go live and connect with this community of Celtic fans who have been built up over the last season or so. When you look at where Celtic are, one of the things that's concerning me, as well as the financial element of that and how difficult the club might find selling the season tickets without a big announcement around the manager. One of the other things that I would like to point out is the kind of moves. Hibs over the last 18 months, and Aberdeen probably over the last few weeks with the appointment of Stephen Glass and Scott Brown there, is how they're progressing. Hibs and Aberdeen, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking to myself, by the time of the new season, they probably are going to be pretty stable in relation to how they're going to approach next season. And I know that Aberdeen were hemorrhaging cash, and their owners spoke about that and what they had to do to try and alleviate these issues. Hibs, on the other hand, I spoke to Ron Gordon just a couple of weeks ago. Thankfully, I was able to enter into one of the press conferences. He spoke about filling the gap somewhat by selling one of their star players. One of the players could be Ryan Porteous. It could also be Nisbet, Kevin Nisbet up front as well. And you're looking at the left-back Doig, I think is a great player. So, Hibs, I think, will be strong next season, as will Aberdeen. My big concern is it's taken Celtic so long to get their act together in relation to getting the manager in place that, next season might be difficult as well. But I will be asking David his thoughts on that as soon as we get back connected visually and on audio. I can hear you and see you, David. How's things at your end?
Yeah. Intermittent.
It's fine. You were telling us there about this incredible attempt to get Clydebank based in Dublin playing in the Scottish League. Was this like a Trojan horse? Were you testing the water back then, see if it could be done?
Well, if one club does it, it does sort of suggest that a second club or a third club can do it. But I don't know if I'd go as far as calling it a Trojan horse. It might have been an effective Trojan horse if Clydebank became Dublin City playing out of Dublin in the Scottish Football League. I don't know if you heard what I was saying earlier. It sort of doubled everything. It doubled the size of the Scottish League. It introduced the fourth largest city in the British Isles into the Scottish League. The sponsorship opportunities, the TV broadcast opportunities, all effectively doubled because you've got a new 5-6 million potential audience from the island of Ireland, joining or looking into your league. So it was so good. In fact, it was knocked back because FIFA, at the behest of the FAI and the SFA, put a proposal to the FIFA plenary before the World Cup in 1998, effectively changing the rules to prevent it. And that rule has been in place ever since in several different guises. But basically, it's a rule that prevents Celtic playing in England as we speak. But I think all these rules are going to get challenged. I think COVID's one thing it has done. I think it might have brought forward a whole lot of forces for change in the game. That's what I think, anyway.
Mm-hmm. One final thing I wanted to ask you about, David, because it's been tremendous that you've joined us. I know we've had a couple of connection issues, but that's by the by. That's just technology for you. I've been, and a lot of Celtic fans have mentioned this on the podcast, very disappointed with this lack of engagement. Now, how have the club been in terms of engagement with the Celtic Trust? And as the chairman of the Celtic Trust, David, what can be done better? What would be good for you as a Celtic Trust to engage with the club? Do you see that as being something that should be done sooner rather than later? And in a sense, it could almost be done in a similar scenario to what we are doing just now. And just as David was going to answer the big question, it's a wee connection issue. Hopefully David will come back in. The other big thing I will ask about... Are you back, David? There we go. We're back.
I'm trying to get a good signal. I don't know what's wrong, so I'll try it here. So listen, the trust proposal for the season tickets is a fantastic proposal because it removes all the negativity. It basically creates a positive dynamic for season ticket holders to buy season tickets after such a bad year, a bad experience. To introduce a whole lot of new young shareholders into the Celtic ownership family is a good thing and beyond criticism. Everybody that's heard about it amongst the support loves it, and they love it because it's a good thing. Now, the Celtic board have had it for 2 months. Radio silence, not any feedback whatsoever other than indirect feedback that they hate it. They just don't like it. It's not helpful, and they would rather not do it. I hope that's wrong, but that's what I've heard. But after 2 months, you would have expected some sort of interface, some sort of dialogue, some sort of discussion, but not a thing. And that, I would say that's very disappointing.
It certainly is. I mean,
augur well for an uptake of the idea. I think Celtic, which was your original question, should be communicating better. I think they are aloof and
we might have lost David.
Or are unaware of the unhappiness of Celtic fans. Then they have a problem, quite frankly.
David, the signal is intermittent, unfortunately, but we will wrap it up there. I'll get back in touch with David and we will hopefully speak to him again at some point. But on that last point that he made in relation to the club, how good would it be if the chairman of Celtic and the chairman of the Celtic Trust were able to have a wee chat on a Celtic state of mind. I'm going to throw that out to you as an audience, as the community that has come together over the last year to share in the disappointments and make all these suggestions and ask, where is Eddie Howe? But yeah, we'll wrap it up here. But I'm going to see if, as a platform, a Celtic State of Mind can pull that together. The chairman of Celtic, the chairman of the Celtic Trust, we will ask the question. We might even try and add some kind of charitable element that we can offer the club. Let's do this. Let's get you on. Let's get you talking to people who want change. They want change at the club. Now, one final point I will make is lucky if you sell 20k this year, fail. Well, thanks for getting involved, chemical gases. I don't think so. I don't think it will get to the point where Celtic have an issue selling 20,000 season tickets. But what they will have to do is they will have to make an announcement very soon. And that announcement in relation will be a managerial appointment. So where are we with that? Radio silence, as David Lowe says. We've had radio silence for some time from the club, and obviously you would expect it to some degree because there's the non-disclosure agreement situation with anybody who has been spoken to about the job, so they won't be talking about it. So it's a good thing that Eddie Howe's not talking about the Celtic job. But I am interested over the last couple of days at some murmurings that are coming through that an announcement may not be made soon, but certainly a decision is going to be made very, very soon in relation to the deadline that's been set. So we will find out one way or another, and hopefully there will be an announcement. Who knows when that will be? We've been calling out for engagement with Celtic for some time. I'm happy to say that at 3 o'clock this afternoon, a Celtic State of Mind will be part of their press conference. But because there's no game at this weekend, we'll be focusing on the other game involving Celtic, which is the Celtic women's team. So we will be in the press conference, we will report back, and we'll show you all the footage. David Lowe came on today to talk about the financial element of COVID and how that affects Celtic, how it might push them down a road that we have looked at time and time again over the last 20 odd years, and that road being a route out of Scottish football. I find it, as I say, fascinating to hear that Celtic were looking at the purchase of an English club. It looks as though we have tried every avenue to move Celtic Football Club out of the Scottish leagues, and due to the COVID scenario and the fact that all bets are off and a lot of rules will be changed and will be amended and updated, Celtic may still play their football elsewhere. What do you think of that? Talk about it a wee bit more when we're back at 12:30. I could rap all day about this. It'd be great if some of you guys could maybe join me at some point. I have thought about that, maybe on an evening from time to time. Some of the audience can send me your email address and I'll dial you in. It won't be a phone in because that would be pretty hard to manage, but we might get an evening AXOM show kicked off where half a dozen of you guys can come in and get involved in this. What do you think of that? Well, if you're interested, get in touch with me on social media. You can email me at pauljohndykes@gmail.com and give me your email address. Let's talk about it. Let's get you involved in a Celtic State of Mind. You might even be able to help me on sniping duties on the comments section. It's always an absolute pleasure to get involved with you guys and girls. Thanks very much for joining me on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. I keep saying this, but if you haven't already done so, make sure that you subscribe on our YouTube channel. We're growing it every day and we're putting out live content every single day as well. We'll be back at 12:30 and I'll see you then.